Hello and good evening, I'm Lee Brown and you're watching A News. Here are today's top stories. Tonight, Trump sets new deadline for Hamas to agree on his Gaza peace plan or face all hell. Belgium launches an investigation after 15 drones fly over its military base as new drone scares hit Europe's airspace. And Armenia says it has agreed with Azerbaijan to reopen transport links as part of ongoing peace efforts. To our top story this evening, US President Donald Trump has issued an ultimatum to Hamas, giving the group until Sunday evening, October 5th, to accept his plan for Gaza's future. In a post on Truth Social, Friday, Trump wrote, "An agreement must be reached with Hamas by Sunday evening. If this last chance agreement is not reached, all hell, like no one else has ever seen before, will break out against Hamas." Trump unveiled the 20-point proposal earlier this week, saying Hamas had 3 to 4 days to respond. The plan includes an immediate ceasefire, a hostage prisoner exchange, a phased Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, Hamas's disarmament, and the creation of a transitional government overseen by an international authority. Hamas is still reviewing the proposal, according to a source close to the group. Staying on Middle Eastern affairs, Israel is facing more international condemnation and global protests after its military intercepted 40 boats in a flotilla carrying aid to Gaza. Officials say it's detained more than 450 foreign activists.
There were clashes in Sweden between pro-Palestinian demonstrators and police as hundreds protested on Thursday against Israel's decision to intercept and detain activists on a Gaza-bound flotilla carrying aid and medicine. The tensions led to numerous arrests. Demonstrations have erupted worldwide as thousands took their anger to the streets. It turned violent in Spain, where supporters of Palestinians and police came face to face in the capital, Madrid, when officers tried to disperse the crowds. Tensions also escalated in Barcelona, where international food chains were vandalized.
I'm hurt. I feel incredibly helpless. I feel anger and sick when I listen to people speaking on the TV or see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a summit saying that children in Palestine eat over 2,000 calories per day. How can they allow that man inside to say those things? The anger in our society has accumulated is here today.
In Italy, emotions also ran high as police used tear gas. Protesters in Brasilia demanded the release of detained Brazilian activists who were on board one of the boats in the flotilla.
Regarding the detained Brazilians, the Foreign Ministry has taken a firm stance. But this is more than diplomacy. It's about genocide. I don't think diplomacy is enough anymore. We need a firmer measure, like breaking off relations. That's what we're asking for.
In Paris, demonstrators gathered in front of the Israeli embassy to show support for Gaza.
I came to demonstrate in front of the Israeli embassy to show our support for the people of Gaza and to demonstrate that the French people denounce the genocide currently being committed in Gaza by the Israeli army.
Governments also responded to Israel's actions. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has urged Israel to immediately repatriate the detained Mexican nationals. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urged Israel to immediately release South Africans who were also on the flotilla, including former President Nelson Mandela's grandson, Nkosi Zwelivelile Mandela. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan criticized Israeli aggression, saying it showed Israel's government has no intention of letting hopes for peace grow. Israeli officials have repeatedly denounced the flotilla mission as a stunt. Israel says it's defending itself against charges of genocide in the International Court of Justice.
With lots to consider with the latest news coming out of the Middle East, we are joined now by Imam Marwan Gil, calling from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
I'd like to start with how significant is the international flotilla in the broader context of the Israel-Gaza conflict?
I think it is definitely a very symbolic importance because it shows it's another mirror to show and another proof and evidence that the war of Israel was never limited to Hamas. It was never limited to terrorism. It was all about causing as much as suffering to the Palestinians. It was the wider war on Palestinians beyond the 7th of October and the terrorist or terrorism of Hamas. I mean, like now it's like a clear proof. These people carrying those 40 vessels and boats and carrying humanitarian aid, you can't blame them. You can't accuse them of being terrorists. So, I mean, like it's a clear evidence and one more proof where the Israeli government and the Israeli army sadly is using the hunger and the famine as tools of warfare against innocent civilians and Palestinians. But also, I think on the other side, on a wider context, if you see these images, and I think it's very important, I would say, to analyze the stand and the role and the input of our Western governments, but I would say even the Muslim governments, because it brings so many question marks. It shows that the people are so frustrated and disappointed into their governments because of their passivity, because of their indifference, and because their lack of actions. So they themselves are taking all the danger to take humanitarian basic aid to the Palestinians, which should be rather the job and the duty and the task of our governments or the international community. Sadly, because of this vacuum, it's the frustration, the helpless situation by the common people who want to make a change and want to bring an end to the suffering of Palestinians.
You mentioned there heading towards the flotilla was heading towards an active combat zone. I don't think I want to get your take on this. Would you consider it also an active combat zone? And if so, should flotillas have the ability to access active combat zones in any case?
I mean, we can now enter into the debate what should be or what's the international laws and regulations. But I think let's zoom out for a second. At the very moment, instead of just limiting it to a legal question and debate about this, let's zoom out and analyze the whole situation, what is going around. The very same moment you and me, we are talking about this, innocent civilians are being killed. We are talking about children. We are talking about women. And this is not happening just, which started like 2 days ago or a few hours ago, almost for 2 years. And I think this is the important question we should keep in mind. What is it all about, these demonstrations and even these 40 vessels and these almost 500 people traveling? What is the need for that? The need is that innocent people are being killed day in, day out. And there is a passivity, there is a silence. Our world leaders are with their arms crossed, no actions. There's maybe verbal rhetoric, very nice urging declarations, questioning, nice speeches in the UN, but then their hands are kind of cut off, and there's no action, no help, no interference to break the suffering. And I mean, it's not a rocket science. We are talking just for the simple stop the war, stop the bombings, and the very simple demand. It's like the ceasefire. Stop the killing of innocent people. And
you touched on their ceasefire. There is a proposal on the plan. We do know that Donald Trump has proposed a 20-point ceasefire, and he's given a Sunday deadline announced today. If that comes into place, is that beneficial to both sides? How likely do you think that is to come into place?
Again, I think on paper it sounds very nice, the 20 points plan. But as many analysts spoke, like according to the proverb, that it's old wine and just presented in a new bottle, right? I mean, like we had these discussions now for almost 2 years, and these resolutions and statements. But what we need is, because when we speak about peace, you know, you will hear everyone, our world leaders, when they go especially to the internet platform, speaking, highlighting the need of urgence of peace. But peace is not something which is just going to fall down from the heaven. You have to create, you have to back up your desires of peace by your actions, by your concrete, precise political decisions. And in order to achieve peace, you have to establish universal principles of justice. And especially I would, as a Muslim and a member and the Imam of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, with such a great sadness, I would like also to point out the passivity and the lack of commitment from our Muslim countries and leaders towards the suffering of Palestinian people. I mean, in their case, they don't have any justification at all, because Islam itself is so clear about protecting the dignity of human life. Our holy book, the Quran, very clearly states that whosoever kills one innocent human life is as if he would have killed all humanity. And on the same side, just the last point, who saves one innocent life is as he would have saved all humanity. So I would wish that our Muslim countries would also take a stronger step, a stronger or more united commitment, and stand on this.
I do understand what you're saying there, but it's important to highlight this is not considered a religious war in many contexts. Would you acknowledge that this is a war between Hamas and Israel in that instance, not about the Muslim world versus the Jewish world?
Of course. I mean, that's the clear proof is that for the last 14 centuries, Muslims, Jews, and I would say even Christians or followers of other religions, they have lived in the Holy Lands side by side, in fraternity, in brotherhood. And it's not a religious war between Islam and Judaism. That's why I think it's very important to highlight that there is no room and no license to express anti-Semitism or hate towards Jews based upon the actions of the Israeli government. On the same side, or the same coin, the same side of the other coin is that Hamas shouldn't be as a reference of Islam or the Muslim identity. Islam condemns terrorism in all of its forms. Islam defines itself through its own
if I may,
and principles.
if I may,
So this, I think, is
I do want to specify on the conflict itself, and it's by no means to degrade what you're talking about, but I do want to keep it on focus. I want to touch on what you mentioned earlier. How do countries holding protests like Spain, Italy, and France balance public opinion with diplomatic relations with Israel?
I mean, I think that's a very, I would highlight, and this shows like, I think not just these countries, but I would say overall, you know, when we define democracy, and especially what comes to my mind is the primary definition by Abraham Lincoln about the democracy: government by the people, of the people, for the people. So I think that's what we see clearly, that you have millions and millions of people across the world. I would say the vast majority of people who want that this war comes to an end, and especially a ceasefire. But then those chosen by the same very people, instead of fulfilling their duties and their tasks and fulfilling their responsibility towards the votes they received, sadly, they are giving preference to their own political agenda and their personal interests. And that's happening in parts of Western countries, but also, I would say, likewise in Muslim countries. And therefore, I especially when I said and highlight the duty of Muslim countries, it's not because of the religious context, but I think especially in case of Muslim leaders, they have such clear principles in their religious teachings, which urges them to help. For example, just a short example, the Holy Prophet, the founder of Islam, he told and commanded the Muslims that they should help the oppressed and the one who is the oppressor. So now it's very clear, those in the sense who are friends of Palestinians or consider themselves that they should step in and help them. But I would say even those countries around the globe who consider themselves friends of Israel, it's their duty to help, in the sense, the oppressor, as the Prophet defined, by stopping him from committing injustice or cruelties.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Imam. Much appreciated, and we hope to have you again on soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
To the latest update coming out of Britain, Greater Manchester Police say one of the 2 people killed in yesterday's Manchester synagogue attack was mistakenly shot by officers during the armed response. Our correspondent Zainab Fajazadeh has more.
Greater Manchester Police have provisionally admitted that their own officers were involved in one of the deaths at the Heaton Park synagogue. In a statement, the force said a Home Office pathologist had determined that 2 victims, including one of the deceased, suffered wounds consistent with a gunshot injury. The chief constable acknowledged these injuries were, in his words, an unforeseen consequence of the urgently required action taken by my officers. Police also confirmed the names of the victims, 53-year-old Adrian Dolby and 66-year-old Melvin Kravitz, both from the local Crumpsall area. The attacker, identified as Jihad al-Shami, was shot dead by armed officers just 7 minutes after the first emergency call on Thursday morning. However, it is understood that al-Shami was not in possession of any firearm. Investigators say al-Shami, a 35-year-old British citizen of Syrian descent, came to the UK as a young child and was granted British citizenship in 2006. His family have posted a statement on Facebook in which they fully distance themselves from al-Shami. As part of the investigation, 2 men in their 30s and a woman in her 60s have been arrested on suspicion of preparing and instigating acts of terrorism. Police continue to work at the scene, and with tensions running high, Greater Manchester Police say more officers will be out on patrol across the city. People from the local area continue to leave flowers and messages close to the scene, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also visited the scene of the attack. Ultimately, the revelation by the Chief Constable will surely lead to more questions over the next few days. Zainab Fajazadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Belgium has launched an investigation after 15 drones were spotted over its Elsenborn military base near the German border on Thursday night. Authorities stated that an assessment of the situation was underway, but confirmed that the origins of the drone are unknown. The sighting is part of a wave of drone disruptions across Europe. Similar incidents hit Denmark and Norway, fueling debate over a drone war on Europe's eastern flank. The most serious case involved nearly 24 Russian attack drones in Poland, triggering a multi-million euro emergency response. Staying on the topic, Munich Airport has reopened after a drone sighting near its airspace forced a temporary shutdown on Thursday night, grounding multiple flights and causing widespread disruption. At least 17 flights were cancelled, affecting nearly 3,000 passengers, while another 15 were diverted to nearby cities. Federal police said the drones were seen twice after dark, but due to poor visibility, details about their size or origin remain unknown. Several European airports have faced similar disruptions in recent weeks, with authorities still investigating the source of the drones. Now, a Finnish court ruled it doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute the captain and 2 senior officers accused of breaking 5 undersea power and internet cables in the Baltic Sea last year. The suspects were charged with dragging the anchor for about 90 kilometers along the seabed on the 25th of December. The 3 crew members denied the charges. Finland says the ship is believed to be part of Russia's shadow fleet of tankers. Helsinki District Court said it was not possible to apply Finnish criminal law to the case. Now, Ukraine may have to wait longer for US long-range missiles as Washington struggles with a government shutdown. Sources say the US Tomahawk missile shipments to Ukraine could be unlikely.
As the war grinds on in Eastern Europe, Ukraine is still waiting for long-range missiles. But that wait could be extended as Kyiv's biggest arms supplier, the United States, faces its own political deadlock. Discussions about US military support for Kyiv were frozen after the government shutdown on Wednesday. The Trump administration's plan to send Tomahawk missiles to Kyiv now hangs in the balance. According to a US official and 3 sources, current inventories are already committed to the Navy and other operational needs. The official said the US may look into allowing European allies to buy other long-range weapons and supply them to Ukraine, but Tomahawks were unlikely. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also expressed uncertainty about the delivery. Washington had previously signed a $500 million aid package for Kyiv last month, the first since Donald Trump returned to office, using funds from NATO countries. The move comes after the Kremlin said on Thursday that if the US provides Tomahawks to Ukraine, it would trigger a new round of dangerous escalation between Russia and the West.
Over in Germany, it's 35 years ago that the country officially reunified after the world watched the Berlin Wall coming down, marking the end of division and the beginning of unity. The day is a reminder that a huge barricade once split the nation, dividing families and friends.
Every year on the 3rd of October, Germany marks Unity Day, the day when a divided nation officially became one. It is a moment to reflect on the country's history, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the reunification that reshaped Germany. To understand why this day is so important, we need to go back to the years after the Second World War. Imagine a city where neighbours, friends, even families woke up to find themselves cut in two by concrete and barbed wire. That was Berlin in 1961, and it is the story that makes German Unity Day. After the Second World War, Germany was divided into 4 zones, each controlled by one of the Allied powers: the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, though deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split into 4 sectors. By 1949, 2 new states had been created. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany, democratic and market-driven. In the East, the German Democratic Republic, a socialist state under Soviet influence. But the GDR had a problem. Its own people were leaving. Between 1949 and 1961, more than 2.5 million East Germans fled, many of them doctors, engineers, teachers, and students. By the summer of 1961, thousands were crossing into West Berlin every single day. The brain drain threatened to collapse the East German economy. So, the authorities acted. On the night of 12th to 13th August 1961, East German forces rolled out barbed wire and blockades around West Berlin. Streets, rail lines, even family gardens were cut in two. In the weeks and months that followed, the makeshift barrier became a permanent one, a wall of concrete reinforced by electrified fences, watchtowers, guard dogs, and landmines. By the 1980s, the Berlin Wall stretched 155 kilometers in total, 43 kilometers slicing through Berlin itself, and the rest circling the western half of the city. It was actually a system of fortifications, parallel walls, floodlights, the so-called death strip in between, and armed patrols under orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. And yet, thousands still risked it. Around 5,000 people made it across, through tunnels, in homemade balloons, even smuggled in cars. At least 140 lost their lives in the attempt, though some counts put the number closer to 190. Each escape and each death was a reminder of how far people would go for freedom. For 28 years, the wall stood as the concrete face of the Cold War. But by 1989, change was sweeping Eastern Europe. In East Germany, mass demonstrations demanded democracy. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, refused to send in tanks, unlike his predecessors. Then came 9th November 1989. At a press conference, an East German official, Günter Schabowski, stumbled over new travel rules, making it sound as though the borders were open immediately. That evening, thousands of East Berliners surged toward the checkpoints. Overwhelmed, confused guards stepped aside. The wall, the barrier that had defined a generation, was suddenly open. Crowds from both sides climbed the concrete, embraced, and began chipping away at it with hammers and chisels. Within days, pieces of the wall were being passed from hand to hand as souvenirs. Less than a year later, on the 3rd of October 1990, East and West Germany formally reunified. Since then, German Unity Day has been a national holiday. Each year, a different federal state hosts the official program of exhibitions, concerts and debates. The date chosen is important too. While the wall itself fell on the 9th of November 1989, that day also carries a darker memory. The Nazi pogrom against Jews in 1938, known as Kristallnacht. To avoid overshadowing that history, Germany instead marks reunification on the 3rd of October, the day the legal and political merger was complete. As Germany marks the 35th anniversary of its historic reunification, debates over lingering political and social divides continue. Yet the Berlin Wall remains a powerful symbol of the nation's journey toward unity and the challenges it has overcome.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and French President Emmanuel Macron met in Saarbrücken today to discuss the growing challenges facing Europe. The leaders highlighted threats from rising autocracies, external pressures on democracy, and economic challenges reshaping the global order. Merz stressed the responsibility of Germany and its citizens to address these internal and external threats, while Macron emphasised Europe's need to protect key industries and strengthen its strategic resilience. The gathering brought together top German and French officials, signalling unity and cooperation in defending democracy and ensuring Europe's economic and social stability.
Autokratien bilden sich gegen uns und greifen die liberale werden neu errichtet.
The global economic order is currently being rewritten. Tariff barriers are being re-erected. Selfishness is becoming more visible again. And perhaps that is why we have become economically weaker. And that is also why the social promises we have made to each other are so much harder to fulfill today than they used to be. In addition, years of irregular, uncontrolled migration to Germany have polarized our country and opened up new divisions in society. This is a huge responsibility, and we are well aware of the scale of the task. But this scale of the task must also be understood and accepted by everyone, by all the citizens of our country.
Muss auch von allen.
Il nous faut une Europe qui protège mieux.
The global economic order is currently being rewritten. Tariff barriers are being re-erected. Selfishness is becoming more visible again. And perhaps that is why we have become economically weaker. And that is also why the social promises we have made to each other are so much harder to fulfill today than they used to be. In addition, years of irregular, uncontrolled migration to Germany have polarized our country and opened up new divisions in society. This is a huge responsibility, and we are well aware of the scale of the task. But this scale of the task must also be understood and accepted by everyone, by all the citizens of our country.
Now Europe turns its eyes to Prague. The Czech Republic votes in a general election that could bring former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš back to power. The outcome will signal whether Czechia stays firmly aligned with the European Union and NATO, or will it increase Moscow's influence in Central Europe.
In Prague and across the country, polling stations are open as Czechs choose all 200 members of the lower house of parliament. Voting runs through Saturday, with parties needing at least 5% of the vote to enter parliament under the proportional system. The front-runner is 71-year-old billionaire and former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. His populist ANO party is campaigning on tax cuts, higher wages and calls to halt support for Ukraine. But despite leading the polls, ANO is unlikely to secure a majority, making coalition negotiations crucial. Prime Minister Peter Fiala's pro-Western Spolu coalition is calling for continued alignment with the European Union and NATO. The far-right SPD is pushing for a referendum on leaving the EU, while the far-left Stachilo movement opposes NATO and rejects military aid to Kiev. Opinion surveys put ANO at around 30 to 32%, Spolu at about 20%, with several smaller parties such as the Pirates, Stan and Motorists for themselves expected to play a decisive role in shaping the next government. Polling stations close on Saturday afternoon. Preliminary results are expected the same day, with near-complete figures later in the evening of October 4th. The outcome will decide whether Czechia remains firmly anchored in Brussels and NATO or takes a turn toward a more Moscow-friendly course.
The US Embassy in Armenia has announced the arrival of a US Customs and Border Protection team. The visit is part of the Crossroads of Peace partnership signed by US President Donald Trump and Prime Minister of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan on August 8th in Washington. Over the course of 2 weeks, the team will assess Armenia's border capabilities and recommend improvements. The mission is also tied to a broader regional project called the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. Now to a major diplomatic breakthrough. Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to mutually unblock transport links. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirziyoyev says both countries will gain access to each other's transport systems, including railways, roads and other infrastructure. He noted that the shortest link between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan will serve as a transit route, while Armenia could use Nakhchivan's territory to connect its north and south by a railway.
And President.
Let's take a look at this in more detail.
After years of closed borders, Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to reopen all transport routes between them. Until now, their shared rail lines and highways, including the only land corridor to Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan territory, have been shut since the early 1990s Karabakh War. In effect, nearly 3 decades of conflict meant closed borders and decades-old blockades that choked regional trade. The war of 2020 between Azerbaijan and Armenia, in addition to leading to the former's victory, gave rise to debate surrounding the opening of communications with the Zangezur corridor and proposed overland passage connecting mainland Azerbaijan and its landlocked Nakhchivan territory via Armenia at the heart of it. After almost 4 years of deadlock, on the 8th of August 2025, parties agreed on the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity in Washington. And now in October, Armenia's Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan confirmed at a security forum that both countries will now gain access to each other's infrastructure, railways, highways and transit hubs. For Azerbaijan, this corridor reconnects Nakhchivan directly to the rest of the country. For Armenia, it opens a rare chance to link its north and south by rail via Nakhchivan's territory, a connection it has never had before. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says the agreement is inevitable and sees it as a path to greater regional stability. He also highlights the economic stakes, especially for Armenia's mining sector, which could export more easily once transit is restored. The reopening of these routes is expected to improve trade, travel and regional connections after decades of closure.
Now, Turkey says it has no intention of giving up Russian gas against the backdrop of growing resistance to Russian energy. Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar says the country plans to increase gas imports from Russia, Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. The minister pointed to existing gas supply agreements with Russia ahead of the winter season. He said access to these resources must be ensured without compromising energy security. Now, Iran is deepening ties with Russia, China and Turkey as it braces for the return of UN nuclear sanctions. Our correspondent in Tehran, Taraj Shirarlilu, has more.
The Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty between Iran and Russia began on Thursday. It lays down enhanced cooperation between Tehran and Moscow in bilateral fields, as well as within regional and international groups such as BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran's foreign ministry said that the two countries will spare no effort to safeguard multilateralism and respect for international law. The treaty consists of 47 articles to work together in technology, information and cybersecurity, peaceful nuclear energy collaboration, and counter-terrorism efforts. It will also focus on regional cooperation, environmental issues, and combating money laundering and organized crime. The treaty will be valid for 20 years after it was concluded in January this year in Moscow by President Masoud Pezeshkian and President Vladimir Putin. As well as strengthening relations with Moscow, Tehran has also signed a comprehensive document on cooperation with Beijing, valid for 25 years. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that China is Iran's comprehensive strategic partner. He also said that regardless of any changes in the international situation, Tehran will continue to deepen its relations with China. And Tehran and Ankara have also discussed bilateral defense ties and regional developments after the Iranian Defense Minister, Brigadier General Aziz Nasirzadeh, visited neighboring Turkey this week. General Nasirzadeh told IRNA that both sides exchanged views on border security, developments in Syria, and Israel threats against the regional countries. He added that both countries' viewpoints were close. This all comes just as the United Nations nuclear sanctions on Iran were reinstated last week. It's despite a joint Russia-China draft resolution at the Security Council proposing a 6-month delay in sanctions. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A-News TV.
Georgia is now advancing its case in Europe. At the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze advocated for closer integration at a meeting where Denmark expressed caution while Hungary showed support. Our correspondent reports.
The European Political Community Summit brought together nearly 50 leaders from across the continent, and Georgia is among the invitees. But the Danish Foreign Ministry moved quickly to clarify the terms of Georgia's participation in the summit. Officials underlined that the EPC is not a European Union meeting and that the invitation to Georgia followed the same format as previous hosts, a technical clarification aimed at countering speculation that Georgia's presence signals a political breakthrough with Brussels. Officials made it clear, however, that the EPC is not an EU meeting and concerns over Georgia's democratic direction remain very real. Still, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze sees the summit as an opening. Speaking to journalists in Copenhagen, he said the platform allows him to lay out Georgia's vision for integration with Europe, a central priority of his government. He highlighted his country's strategic role in regional connectivity and transit, as well as untapped potential in critical minerals, which he argued are vital for Europe's economic future. And while Copenhagen strikes a careful tone, Budapest offers clear support. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban called Georgia the most successful European country, praising its rapid economic growth and insisting that Europe needs success stories such as Georgia to join the bloc. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Now, Georgia is holding local elections on Saturday amid a boycott by 8 opposition parties who accuse the ruling Georgian Dream Party of undermining democracy and drawing the country closer to Russia. Some opposition factions, including pro-EU parties and civic platforms, plan to stage protests instead, branding the day as a national assembly and calling for a symbolic push for change. The elections follow almost a year of protests and political unrest triggered by the suspension of EU accession talks, arrests of opposition figures, and concerns over democratic backsliding. Joining me now to unpack the latest is Dr. George Michilashvili, Associate Professor, European University, calling from Tbilisi, Georgia. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
I want to start with how credible are the concerns about democratic backsliding under the Georgian Dream Party?
Well, one can say that concerns are substantiated because a number of political leaders are today in jail on very suspicious charges, I would say. I mean, the charges, of course, are real. Of course, they can be formally checked, and of course, there is a formal substantiation. But it's believed that this jailing this leader is a political retaliation, and the attempt to weaken the political field in Georgia. So basically, it was believed by many political parties that tomorrow's election have like no meaningful sense. Though the playing field is so uneven, it's better to boycott it. Only two opposition political parties will participate in the election. That several major cities could be won electorally. So it is not shared by other political parties. Anyway, everyone who is opposition-minded in Georgia and in Tbilisi, this is a significant sections of the population, will join the rally tomorrow at 4 o'clock on the main thoroughfare of Tbilisi, Rustaveli Avenue. So tomorrow's day is expected to be very tense.
So you touched on there the concerns, but I just want to get a grasp of how concerned Georgians are at this point in time, considering the boycott.
Well, again, a number of Georgians are concerned. The society is really split. One cannot say how evenly it is split. Probably kind of in the capital, in major cities, most of cities minded. In smaller cities, like in the countryside, in like small villages. So, and in the regions populated by the ethnic minorities, the incumbents, the Georgian Dream, have bigger support. So, but you know, this democratic backsliding and this the discontinuation of this integration into the European Union announced by the Prime Minister Kobachidze, something that you mentioned at the beginning of the introduction, of course, it is a serious concern. Many citizens believe that the country is deviating and backsliding from its European path, and something to be done, like to restore this path, upon which Georgia has been for pretty much all 34 years of its independence, which is believed to be the mainstay of Georgian foreign policy. It is enshrined in our constitution, and it believed that the main road of Georgia is under threat, and therefore, so the country should be back on that road.
Without sounding flippant, but Georgia's had a lot of protests, I think over 300 days, and this National Assembly protest upcoming, how significant do you expect the outcome to be of that?
Well, the symbol is that it is election day. Well, obviously it is difficult to sustain the protest for that long, pretty much more than 10 months. Because the optimism is like gradually fading. There are several days when there are a high number of the protesters. Obviously, they subsided during the summer, during the holiday, during some like major international tournaments in which Georgia participated. But tomorrow's it is believed to be a crucial day because the amount of people and the resoluteness of their support will determine how serious the protest, what is the scale of the protest, and how determined are the protesters actually to break this vicious circle and finally either lead to the snap election, something that the protesters have been demanding for almost 12 months, like since the October election last year, or the creation of the technical provisional government. And of course, they also rely on international support, particularly on the part of European institutions, which have been supporting the protesters along the way.
And one thing I didn't mention earlier was the OSCE. How significant is the absence of the OSCE in observing these elections for international perception as well as in Georgia?
Of course, OSCE has been believed to be a major election observer body, and their absence, of course, is symbolic. Well, many people believe, particularly those who protest, those who belong to the opposition parties, that it means that Georgia now could be considered in the league with Belarus and some other authoritarian countries. So therefore, their absence, obviously, there's no good news generally for the democracy and Georgia's democratic path.
And lastly, I just want to finish because we are running out of time. Could this local election set a precedent for future national level political contests?
That's obviously the hope of the protesters and the organizers of the protests. Well, it remains to be seen. I think that the coming days will answer this question more or less definitely.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your insights, and we hope to have you again on soon. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
That's all we have for now. From all of us in the studio, thank you for watching, and stay tuned to A News.